Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something truly mind-bending, a text called The Existential Dialogues of the Solitary and Strange. Picture this. You're sitting down for a chat with a cast of utterly bizarre, surreal entities. We're talking a 1,000-year-old monk, a human mage, a talking cat, a mutant spider, and a skeleton mage. And the goal? To dissect the fundamental rules of our universe. I know, it sounds totally wild, but hidden within these really strange conversations are incredibly deep arguments about how we exist in the world. We're going to simplify all this complex philosophy into three core themes today: the nature of solitude, the limits of perception, and the frankly terrifying concept of a deterministic reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. Plucking out your own eyes, disabling your pain receptors just to do it, it's pretty intense, right? This absolutely shocking quote from the human mage perfectly anchors the extreme thought experiments we're about to explore. These entities aren't just sitting around philosophizing over a cup of tea, they're pushing their physical and mental boundaries to the absolute limit, sometimes violently, just to test the very fabric of reality itself.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the strange dialogues, the nature of solitude, the limits of perception, a deterministic reality, and finally, the final choice. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The nature of solitude. The monk's 1,000-year isolation.
So our first entity is this deeply melancholic monk. Imagine spending a millennium, 1,000 years entirely alone. He did this just to test the absolute boundaries of his own existence and biology. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer extremity of his experiment. He claims this total isolation actually allowed him to develop these bizarre, superhuman abilities. We're talking jumping like a flea, surviving with zero oxygen, running as fast as a cheetah. Now, sure, he admits he's usually too depressed to actually concentrate and do any of these things, but, that kind of misses the point. It shows how absolute isolation forces the human mind to invent, or maybe even logically construct, these extreme abilities just to cope with a total lack of social reality.
Which brings us to a really massive question the monk poses directly to us. Actually, think about your own life for a second. Is your craving to socialize and escape solitude an essential, hardwired biological drive for survival, or is it just an artificial societal norm, just a mental construct created by the mind because we've been told we need people? The monk points out that biologically speaking, it kind of makes zero sense. We don't technically need social interaction to sustain basic physical life functions.
But he still reaches this really terrifying conclusion. Even if you're physically perfectly safe, right? Like locked away in a concrete box with all your basic necessities totally met, loneliness still acts like this miniature black hole. It literally devours you bit by bit from the inside. It's the first major existential paradox we're heading today. You might be 100% physically safer when you're completely alone, yet you're utterly consumed and destroyed by the emptiness of it.
Moving on to Section 2, Limits of Perception, Senses as Anchors.
Now, if our minds are that fragile when we're alone, how do they actually interact with the world? Let me bring in our second entity, the human mage. He literally tests whether our physical senses are capping our true cognitive potential. Now, what's really interesting here is how he contrasts our senses. He says sight is like a room that completely traps you. It constantly dictates your reality. Audio, though. Audio is just like a bat buzzing past your ear, a fleeting moment that passes right by. Sight is incredibly heavy. It acts as an all-encompassing prison for your imagination compared to those fleeting sounds. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to understand what the mage calls a visual anchor. Because your eyes are constantly feeding you this heavy, all-enveloping sensory data, your brain is forever chained to physical reality. You literally cannot achieve true, untethered fantasy or imagination because your eyes are constantly dragging you down with all this heavy data and baggage. The mage's theory is that to actually imagine something entirely novel, you have to completely sever yourself from all physical visual input.
So what actually happens when you completely remove that anchor? Well, like we heard at the beginning, the mage plucks his own eyes out and jumps into an existential sensory deprivation tank. And the result? Total failure. Actually worse than failure. Without fresh visual input, his brain didn't suddenly unlock some boundless universe of novel ideas. Nope. His deterministic brain just started looping past memories over and over again. He couldn't create a single truly artificial or new thing. It turns out, without external data, the mind is literally just a biological replay machine.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. A deterministic reality, the web of fate.
So if our minds are just replay machines stuck in biological loops, does that mean our entire reality is predetermined?
Are we actually making choices at all? Enter the cat. Yes, a talking cat. The cat proposes this totally fascinating, honestly kind of hilarious method to test if reality is rigged by looking at luck. The idea is to run a rigorous, double-blind study to objectively measure luck as an actual physical force. You perform a random action, record what happens, do it again and again to build a statistical sample, and then check to see if the universe is artificially skewing the results against you.
And the cat confidently predicts that we wouldn't just find random chance. Not at all. Instead, we'd find compounding, exponential bad outcomes, what he calls fractals of terrible luck. The key argument here is that the cat isn't talking about random coincidences. He's observing a cascading failure of luck, suggesting that outcomes are pre-programmed into the very fabric of reality. You don't just happen to have a bad day. The universe literally has a complex, structured fractal of bad luck waiting specifically for you.
This gets even deeper when we meet the mutant spider, and the spider drops an absolute philosophical bombshell about personal agency. Let's look at this comparison. On one hand, you have a locus of control. That's the psychologically healthy belief that you determine your own outcomes. On the other hand, you have delusions of reference. That's the clinical, paranoid madness where you believe random external events are secretly connected to you.
So, the crucial point the spider is making here is that believing we control our own lives, our locus of control, might be just as delusional as full-blown paranoia. Think about it. Both require this incredibly arrogant assumption that you, a tiny biological organism, are somehow uniquely connected to the vast, indifferent universe. Society just mysteriously decided that one of these delusions is perfectly healthy and the other gets you diagnosed with madness.
And the spider doesn't just throw out philosophy, it brings receipts. It lists out concrete biological and physical proof for this determinism. First, the past always flawlessly dictates the present, unbroken cause and effect. Second, your so-called free will is completely compromised. It's literally just dopamine directing your gaze to whatever happens to be convenient. And third, unseen parasites are constantly biochemically altering your behavior without you even noticing. Your choices are merely the inevitable result of action potentials, firing, and environmental factors pushing you around.
Now, if being controlled by brain chemicals and hidden parasites wasn't intense enough, wait for our final entity. The skeleton mage scales this determinism up to a massive cosmic level. He links our human lack of choice directly to the literal expansion of the universe. He argues that dark matter, that invisible stuff pushing galaxies apart since the Big Bang, is the actual heart of existence. And hidden inside that void is a vast, indifferent consciousness that dictates absolutely everything.
So you're probably thinking, well, why don't we notice that we're trapped in this cosmic web? The skeleton mage explains that if we actually perceived the mechanical, squalid reality of our own organs, or the crushing determinism of dark matter, it would break our minds. It would be entirely unbearable. If you genuinely realized you had absolutely zero control over your own life, you wouldn't be able to accept reality. You'd just shut down. So your brain protects you by feeding you a comfortable illusion of choice.
Which brings us to Section 4, the final choice, facing the void.
All of these bizarre, deeply surreal encounters leave us with one ultimate, inescapable existential dilemma, and it's a question you have to ask yourself today. Will you keep pretending? Will you ignore the fundamental deterministic reality we've just unpacked and keep living in your comfortable delusion of free will? Or will you just go along with the tide of inevitable necessities, fully knowing that you are nothing more than a passenger in your own life? Definitely something to chew on the next time you feel like you're making a completely independent, untethered choice. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything.